years ago, 10 farmers, all in the same catchment, decided they wanted to improve the shelter for their upland sheep and beef systems, put back some of the shelter belts and hedgerows that had been taken out, increased tree cover on the farms from 1 to 5%, that's all, but in return found that they had much improved systems in terms of the performance of their flocks and the grass growth and ground carrying capacity. Lots of research was undertaken and found that there were many environmental benefits as well in terms of water management. And of course, these trees and shrubs are all capturing carbon. But there are a lot more innovative systems, such as the silver arable scheme in the left-hand picture and silver poultry, which are now becoming more common. And the Woodland Trust, about 6 years ago, managed to secure some corporate funding to help farmers to test and trial agroforestry. Because although I'm obviously advocating there's lots of benefits of it, it is still a very unpracticed farming system in the UK. And there's lots of reasons why of this. Many of them are sort of common agricultural policy related, in terms that farmers were penalised and lost their basic farm payment if they planted too many trees. And in England, DEFRA didn't take up the agroforestry options in the last CAP round. And although Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland did uptake some, their systems are fairly limited. So, you know, although there's obviously lots of potential benefits, policy, education, lots of reasons why agroforestry hasn't been widely taken up. So as I say, we developed this scheme called Trees for Your Farm, and we've helped over 100 farmers take forward agroforestry systems, and we've got another 25 approved to be done this season. So the picture in the left is of a farm up in Perthshire where they wanted to implement a silver arable scheme. In this case, it's apple trees in their arable rotation. Why? Wanted to improve the overall productivity as opposed to monocropping, spread risk by having annual and perennial crops, be able to add values by turning the apple trees into cider. And that alley strip is now covered with wildflower mixers, so being able to add habitat to support both beneficial insects, pollinators and the general wildlife across the landscape. And of course, those trees, to a degree, will capture carbon. Silver poultry is probably another good success story, which has now got an established premium market for woodland eggs. Really strong evidence to show that when hens have up to sort of 20% tree canopy on their ranges, their stress is reduced, so you get less injurious feather pecking, you get a lot less eggs that are graded seconds, and you'll get a return on investment between 6 to 12 months. We've just completed a 5-year programme of research on some of the woodland egg sites in Cumbria to look at the biodiversity benefits, and it acts as a really effective woodland edge, providing much needed habitat for birds, butterflies, moths, bats, as well as providing that connectivity across the landscape. And again, those trees are capturing carbon. So if we talk a bit about the actual role of agroforestry in carbon sequestration, it's an area that needs a lot more work. We all know that trees are good at building carbon into their woody components, and in particular in sequestering carbon in the soil beneath them and in their biomass below ground. I think up to about 75% is actually below ground. But the actual data on sequestration rates for agroforestry type planting is very limited. Some research that's come out of Europe would claim that for sort of densities of the sort of 50 to 100 trees, which is your typical silver arable scheme, taking up between sort of 5 to 10% per hectare, will cut 1 to 4 tons of carbon per hectare per year can be sequestered. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done on that, and certainly at the moment the on-farm carbon tools seem fairly limited. Most of them, you know, are starting to think about having better data on hedgerows, but I don't think any really as yet do it for the whole range of agroforestry designs that you can have on a farm. So that's something that really needs working on. But obviously, I think you also have to think about how agroforestry can help farmers actually reduce their emissions, and like Martin mentioned, by reducing fertiliser usage. So we all know the value of leaf litter from the trees helping to improve soil health, and the root systems bringing up minerals from deeper down and the soil profiles. So there's those sort of aspects as well that they can help play. And then also agroforestry has a role in some of the other greenhouse gas emissions that need to be tackled, and in particular ammonia, which is obviously becoming quite a serious problem for livestock farmers. So again, there's a role for trees to play in sequestering those emissions that cannot otherwise be got rid of. And, you know, as Martin alluded to, farmers need to be rewarded for this carbon capture. And as yet, you know, obviously we have the established Forestry Commission Woodland Carbon Code, but that's for blocks of woodland. And at the moment, that doesn't deal with trees outside of woods or agroforestry. So another area where improvements need to be made. But agroforestry, as I've sort of alluded to, is also really good for climate adaptation to help farmers improve the resilience of their farming systems. So, you know, provision of shade and shelter is becoming increasingly important for livestock. As we had, was it 2018, when we had the beast from the east, and then quickly followed by drought and heat wave. We're doing some interesting work with Bangor University, where we've got an electric sheep, a model sheep, which mimics a Welsh mountain ewe, and we're sticking it around in different situations where it has shelter, it doesn't have shelter in winter and summer weather, to collect the data to understand how much energy is used just to maintain its body temperature and therefore is being lost to production. So how can the right shelter in the right place improve food conversion efficiency? It's equally important for arable growing. And, you know, again, we're increasingly seeing periods of drought. How can trees help improve their crop water efficiency? It's all about correctly sited shelter belts and hedgerows to slow down the wind and improve crop water efficiency through evapotranspiration rates. So again, just helping to reduce the impact of drought. As with the Pont-Bren example, we know that the research there showed that trees are very effective in helping with water management. By improving the water infiltration rates into the soil, they'll reduce runoff, help reduce inputs going into water courses and help reduce water pollution, and make sure that the ground has better carrying capacity for livestock for longer periods of time. As I sort of mentioned already, any sort of trees being integrated back into the farming system will provide some form of habitat for pollinators, beneficial insects, as well as the wider wildlife across the landscape. And I don't, you know, it's difficult to put quantify the value of that, but, you know, it's there. It's that whatever you do by putting some more trees into the system, you will provide some benefits. Another problem, obviously, is certainly in the eastern side of the country, where we have more arable production and perhaps inappropriate farming in terms of growing maize, etc., in places that perhaps shouldn't be. Trees can act as a real natural barrier to help prevent soil erosion caused by both wind and rain. You know, planting across contours and along by riparian edges. So lots of roles. But we mustn't forget the role of existing trees and woodlands, and it's very important that farmers are encouraged to conserve, enhance and restore the current tree cover they've got. You know, simple things like managing your hedgerows in a different way, allowing them to grow taller, bushier and not being flailed every year can make a difference. But we also need to think about where we're going to have those wonderful ancient and veteran trees of the future as well, and support farmers to be able to just adapt their farming techniques just to make sure that we do get those future veteran trees. So overall, I would just like to say that I strongly believe, and you can challenge me in the Q&A afterwards, that agroforestry can really play its part, and that 70% of the UK land area that is farmed has room for lots of trees if they're in the right place to support a sustainable farming business going forward. And I think what is good about agroforestry, if it's designed correctly and the trees are in the right place, it will avoid those trade-offs that you can often get with other things between food production and the delivery of a whole array of public goods. So we were pleased to see that the Climate Change Committee report did recommend that 10% of farmland should be converted to agroforestry. Unfortunately, it's hidden and it's not in the main report and not the headlines that get publicised. So there's a lot of work still needs to be done there. But it can, you know, the modelling will show that it has a serious role to play in helping to reduce those emissions. And the Drawdown project, which was a global piece of work to identify the most effective mitigation solutions, out of the 80, they ranked silver pasture as 9th, and it was the highest one in terms of agriculture. So on a positive note, I'd just like to mention that two things. One, the Woodland Trust, if you've been fired up to want to plant trees on your farms, the Woodland Trust does have offer free advice and supported schemes. So, and there's a link which was in the chat, but we can circulate that again later, or find details on our website. So do have a look at that, see how we can help you. And then secondly, the Woodland Trust, along with the Soil Association, the Organic Research Centre and Abacus Agriculture, and for those of you who are interested in agroforestry will know that that's Stephen Briggs's consultancy, have been awarded a DEFRA test and trial on agroforestry, which will be starting in November. And the main aims of that is to identify what payment incentives and the mechanisms around to deliver those, and the same for advice and guidance, are required if farmers are able to take agroforestry up at scale. So again, if you're interested in that, do get in touch with me. I think that's me.
Lovely, thank you ever so much, Helen. A wonderful quick trip around to the world of agroforestry, and I think what it can actually bring to the net zero work that we want to be doing. What I'd like to bring in next is David Lord. He's looking at it from very much from his farm point of view down in Essex. So he's going to tell us what he's been doing and what changes he's made to his farm. Thank you, David.
Right. Thank you, Alison. Hello, everybody. Hopefully this is going to zoom out. There you go. Right. So I'm just going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of my farm and what we're doing, and how net zero features in the way that we farm. We're down here on the northeast Essex coast. We're farming about 700 hectares of mostly arable combinable crops. We've got a real mixture of soils. We're mostly London clay, which is pretty heavy, but we vary from sand over gravel to marine clay, some of which is below sea level. About 6 years ago, we came to a conclusion that the way we're farming just wasn't sustainable. We could see a perfect storm brewing with high costs, yields were plateauing. We had increased weed, pest and disease pressure. The weather really was becoming a lot more changeable. We've had a gradual increase in rainfall on the farm over the years, but it's the volatility of the weather that was really causing us problems. So we had to find a more sustainable path. And we made this decision really, we didn't really figure net zero into it at that point. I was more concerned with creating a system that was going to see me farming to my retirement and you know, the next generations onto. So I mean, I show this picture to a lot of people when I do different talks, and it's always really interesting just to ask people what they see when they look at this picture. A conventional arable farmer would probably say, well, I see a pretty good plant of wheat there, but I see a lot more than that. I see habitat, I see residue on the surface, and I see residue being cycled. There's worm middens, there's fungal and bacterial breakdown. The soil has residue on the surface, which gives it armour against heavy rainfall, and it holds moisture in during dry times. So from a net zero perspective, this really ought to be recognised as a carbon building system. For me, the farmer, it results in a healthy soil. So I'm using lower inputs, I've got better margins, providing I can maintain yields. And something that we've found over the 6 year journey we've been on so far is that our new system is a new system. There's not a lot of information out there. It's been a big learning process, and there are pitfalls to watch out for. But I think generally, the fact that it's a healthy soil and it's good farming, I think that's a good reason for farmers to realise that net zero, the aim of net zero, is a good target for them to have. It encourages good resilient farming systems that sequester carbon. But net zero, as Martin adhered to earlier, it's a flip-sided coin. We can sequester carbon, we know that, but on the other hand, we release carbon in the form of greenhouse gases. And the balance of these two is obviously the crux of the thing that we're talking about today. It's whether we achieve net zero or sub-zero, as Martin called it earlier. So we need information. Now, this is, I plugged in our farming system into the Cool Farm tool, which is one of the many carbon calculators there are on the internet. They're all free. There's also a carbon-friendly farming toolkit, which is another good one. But I use this one. It's a really good way of demonstrating to yourself where you fit into the net zero way of thinking, and it enables you to make informed decisions. So as you look at the two things there, we've got wheat on the left and beans on the right. Both are winter crops that feature in our rotation on our farm, and basically the bars which are to the right hand side, they're showing emissions, and the single bar to the left, which is the way that we manage our land, that's showing carbon being sequestered. And I was quite surprised when I put in my figures for the farm that actually we've come out sub-zero. For wheat, not so much, but we're still slightly, we're at 362 kilos. We are on the right side of the line. But beans, obviously, without any fertilizer, without any nitrogen fertilizer, they've come out a lot better at nearly 1,300 kilos of carbon a hectare. This is based on the 5-year average yield. So it's now my sort of farm average, if you like. And the key for me is accepting that we are going to have emissions to the right, mitigating them where possible, lowering, especially for me is nitrogen fertilizer, but also, concentrating on our land management. And it's important to stress at the moment, having just listened to Helen, this data you're seeing on the screen here, this doesn't include any of my surrounding field habitat. So we have a lot of hedges on our farm, we have a lot of boundary trees, we have some woodland, so all this has got to be added into the mix as well. The other thing which is important here is that at the moment this data is displayed by area. If I change that to by yield of crops, so output per tonne, that's a really important figure to consider, because productivity is a key driver here. If we can be sustainable and productive, our emissions per tonne will be a lot less. So the two ways I've approached this, we've got one which is sequestering carbon, and the other which is reducing our emissions. So here on my farm, this is a mainly arable outlook, I must admit, but livestock does feature. We are using cover crops. So in between growing our combinable crops, we try not to have any bare soil. So as soon as we've harvested a crop, we'll go in and sow a cover crop, a mixture of different species to try and build carbon into the soil. We're using free sunlight. We're not putting, all we're doing is sowing a cover crop, and we're using the sunlight and the moisture that's in the soil to convert that sunlight into carbon. It's really important to stress, nature wants to store carbon. Given a chance, given a healthy soil ecosystem, it will put carbon into the soil. We just need to give it a helping hand. Reducing tillage, so wherever possible. I mean, we're using a no tillage regime on our farm, but these principles can be applied to any form of farming, really. If there's a way of reducing your tillage, then you should try and do it. It just means that there's less carbon lost through cultivations. Residue management, for me, really important one, because the way that the soil deals with residue is really key to how much carbon we can put into our soil. You obviously need worms to pull the residue into the soil, but it's really important to have really healthy, active fungal systems, which fungi are the key to building carbon into the soil, because they're the things that break it into the humus, which is the long-lasting carbon that we want in our soil. It's something that will stay there for years and years and years, but it takes several years to build. It's not a quick process. It takes a long time to build these things up. And the key driver to reducing fungal populations in the soil is cultivations. So again, reduced tillage has an impact here. The other thing, rotation, really important. Nature loves diversity. To work with nature and to allow it to build this carbon that it wants to build, we need to provide the diversity it craves. We need diverse crop rotations, so lots of different crops year on year, and build into that cover crop mixtures. We also need to build livestock in when we can, and also companion cropping. If we're growing a single monocultural crop during the year? Is there a way we can add another species into it? Maybe it doesn't make it to harvest that species, but the other, the main combinable crop will. So looking at different things, and these are all things which are happening on a larger and larger scale in this country, which is great. And the final thing there is livestock, and it's the final dimension that we haven't quite managed here. We've had some sheep grazing some cover crops, like Martin has, but it's not something that we do on a large scale yet. But it's something we need to look at. We do have a few beef cattle which live over winter in some of our sheds. And actually listening to Helen earlier about hedges and trees and how we can add value from a carbon point of view to our habitat on our farms. Something that we're looking to do is to actually, so some of our hedgerows we've allowed to grow up quite big, and something that I'd like to look at doing is coppicing those hedgerows and then chipping the coppiced wood and adding it, mixing it with farmyard manure to actually make a compost. Something that, it's all these things we need to, these little things which make the sum we're looking for at the end. So in terms of reducing carbon emissions, I mean, the key one, which everyone knows about, is nitrogen fertilizer use. It's a very, very energy sapping process to make nitrogen fertilizer, the Haber-Bosch process. And actually, when you look at the carbon emissions from certainly from my farm, fossil fuel usage is pretty minor in comparison to how much nitrogen fertilizer emits in terms of carbon. So anything that we can do to reduce nitrogen fertilizer use whilst maintaining productivity, we have to look at. And it's a hard one because there's not a lot of commercial drive at the moment, it seems, to actually come up with ideas here. We're pretty much, farmers are on our own, relying on each other to exchange knowledge and find out ways to come up with what ways to reduce nitrogen fertilizer use. One interesting thing, a few years ago, I was lucky enough to hear a professor from Nottingham University called Professor Edward Cocking, who had developed a nitrogen fixing bacteria, well, he'd found a nitrogen fixing bacteria which you could coat on a seed, and it would enable a cereal to become nitrogen fixing. It's a naturally occurring bacteria which lives in the soil anyway. He'd just managed to concentrate it up and add it onto a seed and enabled a wheat crop to produce its normal yield with less than half of its nitrogen fertilizer use. So it's technologies like that which could come to the fore to help us reduce nitrogen use. The other thing in terms of research is we really need, and again this comes back to commercial drive, is research into managing soils in a way that can improve the content of the soil in terms of nitrogen fixing bacteria, fungal species like mycorrhizae which help the breakdown of residue, things like that. And this research, it's limited because there is limited commercial gain for the big companies out there to look into it. So there's a really important role here, I think, for organisations like Nature Friendly Farming Network, like the AHDB, to enable that and facilitate the knowledge exchange, which will which will give us the answers that we need. And the last thing on there is end user requirements, and certainly from an arable point of view, if we're growing wheat for bread making, we have a requirement. One of the specifications they want is 13% protein. Now, to get 13% protein in your milling wheat, you have to apply an awful lot of nitrogen fertilizer. It's quite possible to make bread from lower protein, with lower nitrogen, lower protein, but there's this higher level which the end user requires, and it's driving increased nitrogen fertilizer use. So there's a responsibility there, I think, for the end users and for society as a whole to come together and find out ways that we can reduce our nitrogen use. So that's me pretty much done. I'd just say that at the moment, talking to fellow farmers and about the way forward, and I'm finding there is an increasing challenge to change. you know, there are challenges to going forward to try and achieve net zero. The key uncertainties really at the moment is what's going to happen with trade and what's going to happen with the agriculture bill. And it seems like industry is holding its breath. A lot of the answers are out there, and you'll have seen from what I've just said, none of it really is rocket science. It's not a complicated thing to do, but it is change, and with change comes risk. And at the moment, I think with all the uncertainty that surrounds our industry, I think that's holding things back at the moment. So that's me done. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much indeed, David. That was great to see just the really practical ways that you've just turned things in the farm and made quite a lot of difference by the looks of that as well. We're just going on to our last speaker now, Chris Clark. And Chris is going to take you looking at net zero, but very much from a business point of view, and how you might be able to review and look at your business, and subsequently that will help from a net zero achievement for that. So I will now hand over to Chris, who will take you through. Chris, have we got you on mute?
Right, sorry about that. I'm now coming forward. Right. Okay, thanks very much, Helen. And as Helen said, I'm going to tackle this very much from a business point of view. And I've spent the last 2 years looking at about 80 farm accounts and have come up with some what we think are interesting conclusions. But before we get into that, let's just have a quick look at the definition for net zero, and it refers to the balance between the amount of greenhouse gas produced and the amount removed from the atmosphere. And what we're trying to do is get to a point where the amount of greenhouse gas farms add is no more than the amount taken away. So how can we achieve this from a business point of view? Now, I'm going to tackle this from, I think, an unusual standpoint to start with. When I put the next screen up, I don't want you all to fall asleep. So let's see how we go. Agriculture and thermodynamics. Now, why is this important? Why is understanding or beginning to try and understand what thermodynamics are and why it's important? Well, it's important for 3 reasons. Thermodynamics is going to help us as farmers reduce our emissions. Understanding what they are, thermodynamics is going to help us fundamentally move more easily to net zero, and probably most importantly almost, it's going to help us run a farm business to be more profitable. That's why thermodynamics are really, really important. And there are 4 laws. I'm going to concentrate on one, and that's the second law. It is not possible to transfer thermal energy from a colder to a hotter body without doing work. Simply, that means you can't get more energy out than you put in. And what we have to be doing is treating what we produce as farmers as a fuel, because that's what we do. So you can't get more energy out than you put in. And on top of that, we have nature providing free issue resources. David mentioned it, Martin mentioned it, and I think Helen as well mentioned it. There's this free issue sunshine, free issue rain, free issue fertility, and free issue grass or crop growth. And that free issue will always produce no emissions. There are 0 emissions. So if we then take this free issue producing 0 emissions and try and substitute nature within agriculture, and that when you do that substitution, it involves additional work over and above the value of what you get out. That increases emissions. This is what thermodynamics is all about. Artificial fertilizer improves yields in the short term, but increasing amounts are required to maintain those yields. It doesn't matter whether it's fertilizer or whether it's purchased animal feed or additional vet med, they increase emissions. So of the 80 farms that we've seen, and that one slide on thermodynamics, what do I conclude? We substitute for nature at our peril. If we put too much fertilizer on or too much spray, we will get increased emissions, but not only that, we will reduce the profitability of our business. And I'll show you why in a minute. We have to treat nature as a shareholder. If we do that, we will reduce emissions. What do I mean by treating nature as a shareholder? If I invest in David's farm or in Martin's farm, I become a shareholder of that farm and expect to receive a dividend. I then would appear on the liability side of the balance sheet. Now, if we treat nature as a shareholder because of the free issue sunshine, the rain, the fertility, the free issue grass, then nature is a shareholder and therefore appears on the liability side of the balance sheet. Now, as a shareholder of David or Martin, I expect a dividend. Nature cannot be paid a dividend, but it still should be treated as a shareholder and treated in a way that farm businesses do not decapitalize the asset that nature has provided us. And so that is why nature should be a shareholder in every single farm business. Farms must move to maximum sustainable output. That will reduce emissions. And I'll show you what MSO is in a second or two. And if you move to MSO, the profitability of that business before support or other sources of income is a simple function of what nature's bounty has provided. So when the natural fertility, what nature's bounty has provided, when the natural fertility or the grass runs out, we incur extra costs. Farm businesses incur extra costs. And those extra costs are incurred to compensate for the disadvantages of one of many things or several things. For example, they may be costs incurred to compensate for elevation or latitude or precipitation or poor soils or poor soil structure. We incur extra costs. When we do that, they invariably, on all of the 80 farms I've been onto, they are all exhibiting the same characteristics. They invariably reverse profitability. And if you are then reversing profitability, there will be increased emissions because you're trying to drive production through compensating costs. So net zero and a truly sustainable farm businesses, which is where Martin and David are trying to get to, net zero and a truly sustainable farm business are inextricably linked. Running your farm with an MSO view and with nature as your shareholder will help you get to net zero quicker. So what's the evidence for this? Well, this is what I learned at agricultural college, the standard economic theory of the firm. As you increase your output through selling cereals or stock, sheep or beef, your revenue lines go up, your fixed costs remain the same because they're standard, but your variable costs go up with volumes as well. And where the variable costs cross the revenue line, then you get break even, and beyond that, profits. That's what I was taught at college, and is what most, probably 90% of farmers believe now. Okay, that's within some sort of reason, but generally, dry production, you'll make more money. So in this model, variable costs have a linear relationship with volumes and output. At some point, there will be a profit will be made, and this implies that there is an economy of scale. But this driving production can result in increased emissions. What is the solution to this? Well, same chart, same revenue line, but we've called it not the standard economic theory of the firm, but the realities of economic theory on the farm. Fixed cost the same again, revenue line the same again. There's the variable cost line, but actually I've hatched it and I've shaded it beyond a certain point. Why have I done that? Because this is what we find happens in agricultural businesses. The variable costs are non-linear. And if what we call here is PVCs, so from the point on the vertical axis to the inflection point is the variable costs associated entirely with the naturally available grass or fertilizer. And from beyond the inflection point, we have CVCs, the corrective variable costs. These are substituting for nature, trying to drive production beyond the naturally available grass. So the PVCs are working with nature and the CVCs are substituting for nature. X is the break-even point and Y is the breakback point. And we are dealing with farmers, I am dealing with farmers that have gone through X, through the profitable area in this triangle here, to Y, and are in the breakback loss-making area again. So where do farms need to be? They need to be at the MSO point, this maximum sustainable output, the inflection point where the corrective variable costs start driving upwards because of the additional costs being put into fertilizer and feed, vet and med, etc. So variable costs on this model are non-linear. The PVCs are working with nature, the CVCs are substituting for nature. This model, and we haven't found anything different on any other farm, this model completely destroys economies of scale. The drive for production, the drive to put fertilizer on sprays and use feed with livestock. Profitability deteriorates as outputs expand, and at the point where the variable cost rates change and increase is the maximum sustainable output. And I repeat, we've done 80 farms nearly, and not a single one has exhibited any other characteristic. And at the MSO point, by driving production, the emissions increase. So what are the implications of all this? What we found with the farms that we've been to is that the farm size is not the determinant of how much natural fertility is available. There are plenty of small farms that have more natural fertility than bigger farms. Farm businesses should downsize to MSO. They should do it progressively and eliminate the CVCs as downsizing is achieved. And both Martin and David have suggested how that might be done. And of course, Helen has introduced trees into that, and that will help as well. You need to reduce fixed costs in your farm business. And if you do these things, significant environmental improvements will accrue. And this helps the farm business move towards net zero. A business approach to net zero and MSO makes the business more resilient, more profitable, better for nature. Finally, net zero and the economic commercial prospects for farm business, no matter what the drivers are, is driven by the availability and quality of the natural fertility and grass. Okay, what nature gives us, nature's bounty, we have to work our cost structure around that. It's driven by the ability of the farmer to use this resource effectively. We're finding that farms that embrace the naturally available fertility, the naturally available grass, have more profitable and more resilient businesses. We need to be treating nature as a shareholder. Absolutely critical. And it should be driven, the business has to be flexible. The change of business model for most farm business in the UK, and that flexibility is going to have to be absolutely critical for the next few years. And of course, it's driven by the understanding and relevance of the second law of thermodynamics. Something probably has never been spoken alongside the word agriculture. And although I said finally, it's actually finally. There are only three certainties in life: death, taxes, and you've guessed it, the second law of thermodynamics and its relevance to net zero in agriculture. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I know there was quite a lot of new things to take in, probably from Chris's presentation. It's a very different way of looking at things, but hopefully it made a sense of how we should approach things from a business point of view, as well as the practical element as well of farm businesses. It's been great to see there's been lots of questions coming in. So I think we've got the good part of 25 minutes now where we can start putting some of these questions back to the panel. And obviously, if we've got time for more to go on after that, then we'll really, include those as well. I know several of you put several questions in, which is absolutely fine. What I'll probably do is just go around so everybody at least gets the one question answered, and then we'll go around again, sort of thing from there. So Bill, you wanted, did the panel worry that the market-led incentives to reward delivery of public goods will disadvantage the smaller farms? So how does the panel feel about that?
I'll kick off. I think everyone will get rewarded. Those with a larger asset base, a bigger farm, will get more because the base is there. But I think the smaller farm has an important role. They have a lot more natural capital and scale to deliver options. So I think everyone, that they equally should be rewarding to all.
Yeah, I'd second that, Bill. I mean, the other thing which I think is key to all of this is the need for attention to detail, and Chris touched on it as well. Actually driving this forward is how well you can deliver it on the ground, and for that you need attention to detail, and for this reason I think small farms will be really well placed.
So I would just add, Alison, that I would want to ask the question, what is support for? Is support there to get a farm business to break even? Is support there to get the farm business to break even and a salary for the farmer? Or is support there to prevent the decapitalization of nature? And I think it's a third one. But we've also found with the 80 farms that we've been to that smaller farms are not necessarily disadvantaged because they run their businesses better. And Martin's right about what you've got you should be paid for, but there are plenty of things that small farms can do that the bigger farms won't do.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you very much, Bill. I hope that answers that question for you. The next one, sorry.
Yes, I was going to say it does, and so it's really interesting to hear the views. But I guess my concern is no one yet knows how that market will actually work in practice, and one of the concerns I have is that it will probably be quite a greedy market that is dominated by lots of big players who are the main culprits, who are trying to offset their continuing release of emissions, and that these are the kind of players who would be quite unscrupulous in exploiting the opportunities that such a market can create them once it's let rip. And I just wonder if anyone, am I alone in envisaging it playing out like that, or maybe people are aware that there would be other redeeming features that we could expect to see.
All I'd say, I think it's important that we have our voices heard with those alternative views, and that's one of the roles of the network, is to bring those voices together and other organisations. If we don't speak up for what we can do as farmers on the ground and what we can do within our landscapes, others will do it for us.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So the next one is particularly aimed for you, please, Martin. The soil analysis, more precision of fertiliser and seed placement sounds very interesting. This comes from Mirjam. How do you scan the fields, and is it feasible technology for farmers to take this on easily?
Yeah, I think everyone can take it on. Some of it has a cost, but from what we've spent doing it, we've had 4 times the amount of revenue back by reduction of inputs. And as we've improved our soil quality, we're reducing the need for the continual assessment. So some of it's done through satellite, some of it through vehicle imagery, some of it's through soil testing. So you can either walk a field and do GPS points every half hectare, every hectare. And that gives you a baseline of where that piece of field is and how you can treat it, and then the yield within that piece of field. So it's about layering it up as you get opportunity to invest in machinery. Think about how you can tailor that into the output of your farm.
Thank
you, Martin.
Then we're going over to Marta. She says, is it true farmers are seeing manure and digestate as a waste, but unfortunately it costs a lot of money to get a PAS 100 to sell it? If they can't find no one who wants it, they need to get rid of it. I don't think the government has to make subsidies. I do think the government has to make subsidies more available to farmers to help solve this problem.
So I'll pick up on that one again. We use PAS 100 compost. It costs us £2 a tonne more than un-PAS 100, which has more contamination in. Some farmers see waste as manures and that as a waste, and it's not. It's a valuable product, and we must put a decent value on it. And as we see possible carbon charging coming on artificial fertilisers, we'll see more revenue, more interest in having those manures and composts. But what we do have problems with is those qualities, particularly around some of the compost and some of the sewage sludges. We need clear standards.
What I was saying is for getting the pasteurizer, the peanut that pasteurizes the compost or digestate or family manure, it costs a lot of money. So a lot of farmers can't afford to get it. And it's for that they don't get a PAS 100 because they can't buy a material. It's only the government that could increase and allow farmers to get the material. It would be better. Everybody would do it.
Certainly around where I am, a lot of the water companies want the farmers to take it, and it's tested and certificated to a high standard. So it's not an overburdening cost to us, and it actually replaces a lot of artificial products. And government do have a role in making those standards and getting companies to adhere to them.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Rightio. So we've got a question here from going back from Bill again. Does the Woodland Trust agree with the CCC's call for large-scale planting of trees on upland rough grazing to be accompanied by intensification of livestock sectors on better quality land in the lowlands? So Helen, I'll leave that to you.
No, we are very strongly advocating, and I think probably a good example of this was in our response to the England Tree Strategy that's just recently closed, that it is trees outside of woods are the forgotten component of all of this. And I think certainly in the uplands, there's a lot of scope for the integration of the type of activity that Bill, I'm sure you were doing in terms of wood pasture. That is a really valuable ancient habitat that has largely been lost and degraded, but put back in at scale would deliver a lot of those demands on that upland area, would maintain farming whilst improving water management, carbon capture, as well as I would imagine the aesthetics and the landscape and the biodiversity. I don't want to be too challenging, but I think we would probably all admit that places like our uplands no longer have the level of wildlife that they used to, or we probably even think they still do have. And I think there's a big public misconception about what has happened up there. So no, we don't want to see wall-to-wall trees. We want to see trees integrated back into a more natural way, which combines with that sustainability of those traditional practices. Does that answer your question, Bill?
It's just what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
That's good.
I'll add that of the 80 farms we've seen so far and analysed, any intensification of that farming business makes it less resilient, less robust, and less sustainable environmentally.
Okay, thank you very much. David, we've got several questions, sort of quick ones. I'll group them all together for you for people that want to know a little bit more from your system that you're working on the farm there. Rightio. Are you working on direct drill min-till systems?
Okay, we are majority of what we do is a direct drill. So we don't do the only form of tillage that we do is a form of drainage called mould draining, which we do every 5 years. Other than that, we don't do any cultivations. We're just using cover crops to condition the soil.
Can I just follow that up with a very brief comment? Thanks for that, David. With your soil carbon visions, how are you sampling the soil at different depths in the context of tillage and looking at soil carbon sequestration?
Yeah, that's a really good question. To date, we've done a mixed sample, but what we're starting to see now that we're 6 years in, we're actually starting to see sort of layers in the soil, and these aren't necessarily sort of structural layers. It's more layers they've also got different densities of nutrient and residue and things like that in them. So when we go around and test the next batch of testing that we do, we're probably going to test each layer to try and differentiate what's going on. We haven't seen any issues with crop health yet, but it's an interesting thing which does seem to be happening.
Thank you very much indeed. And also, Anne would like to know, does the reduced tillage mean you have to use herbicides to kill previous crop and weeds?
No, we actually have less weeds now because we're not moving the soil. Most weed seeds are stimulated by cultivation. So by not moving the soil, we're seeing a lot less, a lot less weeds. We don't, on most of our break crop, so things like Orsa grape and winter beans, we now don't use any pre-emergence herbicides. So it's definitely reduced the weed burden.
That's great. And also being asked by Miriam, have you noticed any increase in diseases when you leave the plant debris on the field?
No, we are now using less fungicide than we used to. So no, we haven't noticed that. Although we aren't chasing the wheat crops like we used to. You know, the key before we moved to this system, the key driver in our business was how much wheat we could farm. We've moved away from that now. We're now only growing a third of our area is in wheat. I was talking about the diverse cropping system, and that's obviously helped reduce the disease burden.
That's great. And Bill would like to know, why do millers, if they're requiring a high protein and you can make bread from a lower protein, why are we doing this? Why is this happening?
Because they can. They want the cream of the crop, and they need a consistent, in their defence, I suppose, they need a consistency of supply by asking for that level of protein they're going to get, because they're trying to produce, mass produce a very refined product, and they need that consistency to do that on a large scale. When you look at organic bread, it's produced with lower protein, but they're also, they're not as mass produced large systems, so that they can batch produce a lot more, a lot better. So yeah, there's a difference there.
Yeah, that's great. And really, there's to all of you, as from Marta as well, are there labs that can offer you complete field analysis sort of every 5 years when you need to, know that one?
Yeah, so most agricultural labs now will offer us, you can have your standard soil test, which we used to have, which just showed us the P and K indices in the soil, which are largely irrelevant now to me. I'm more interested in how healthy the plant is, but also the micronutrient levels in the soil. It's all about building up a picture of the soil and using that to plan what you're doing on the farm. But the other part of testing, which is a real problem with all of this, is that they are very, different labs use different techniques, and actually trying to compare and benchmark yourself against others is quite hard. Even just benchmarking against yourself from the result you had 5 years ago, testing for soil organic matter isn't a precise thing, and it can be quite challenging. You know you're doing the right thing, but actually measuring that and trying to pick out change can be hard.
And I think you're quite right, the variability, and I know with some of the farmers I've worked with, shall we say, those that are perhaps associated with the sale of some additional things to go onto the farm, their soil analysis can actually look quite different to what you might do from other ones. So it's as good as it is on the day it's taken, I think, for those ones, isn't it? But you try and compare otherwise. Rightio. Right, over to you, Chris. Sidebat says he doesn't like the word shareholder. So what are you going to do, and how could you use some different words?
Okay, so I have been approaching the last 2 years when I go onto farms as a business, not necessarily as a farm. So I use business terminology. However, the nomenclature that we use, whether it's PVCs or CDCs or shareholders, do not suit everybody at all, particularly those who have not been involved in business in the way that I have. So I quite understand the reticence about some reticence about the use of these names. Stakeholder, shareholder, I don't know what it is, but I don't mind what word we use, but we can change it.
Okie doke, that's fine. And Dusty would like to know what types of farms, and out of the 80, what sort of farms were you surveying, please?
So of the 80 farms, the majority have been hill farms. We've done so far 2 arable farms with more coming on, and we've done about 12 lowland mixed farms. So, and it doesn't matter which farm we go on to, the characteristics are always the same.
That's great, lovely, thank you very much. And I noticed within the chat, just very quickly, it's come up sort of, where can you find out a bit more about Chris's work? And it is called Less is More. It was done in conjunction with the RSPB, National Trust and Wildlife Trust for that report. And we'll make the link available up on the site. And what we do have for everyone is that we do have a sponsors, because we're sponsoring the Northern Real Farming Conference. We do have like an exhibition showcase room that you can go in there and you'll find out lots more information and different links to other things on the website as well. And I think, Chris, what we'll do is make sure the link goes in there for the Less is More report. We can do that for everybody for that as well. So Bill would like to know, David and Martin, do you ever envisage going back into livestock production for yourselves?
And currently I'm trying to work with local graziers, new entrants, to give them an opportunity to grow their businesses. If I can get the infrastructure put back in place for the fences and bits, we already have the water infrastructure in much of what we do. I can see us having livestock back. Whether I manage them, that would be a different matter. But I'm looking at how we can support other entrants into the industry.
Very similar to Martin, really. I mean, we used to have a dairy herd here on the farm. We used to have beef followers as well. But it's an area that I think needs specialist knowledge and to work with someone, as Martin's suggesting. I think that would be the best way forward. I mean, even if they're coming from afar, you know, highlands down to lowlands. We've had sheep here from Derbyshire before. So yeah, I think that working together has got to be the way forward on that.
It's an ideal scenario for bringing in joint ventures, really, isn't it? And working together, a great way to get people to come in if they can't access land otherwise. So that sounds great. Helen, I think there was one for you from Jen Shaw. Do you think that the agroforestry test and trial method you mentioned will influence the woodland carbon code to include more types of woodland and hedgerows?
Well, we can only hope. I mean, obviously the big, you know, we've got lots of opportunities to influence both elm and, you know, the outcomes of what the England Tree Strategy will deliver, and obviously nature recovery networks, as well as the actual more commercial angle of things like the Forestry Commission Woodland Carbon Code, and even having carbon on-farm tools that take on board the woody elements of a farm. So yes, I mean, a lot of my role, and with colleagues at the Woodland Trust and with other organisations, is to try and influence both policy, and so Forestry Commission is obviously on our target list, and there are some insiders in the Forestry Commission who are quite supportive of agroforestry now. But yeah, there's a long way to go. But yes, it has to be we've got to break down that barrier between agriculture and forestry and just make it all about land, rural land management, where it's all fully integrated. So there's lots and lots of components to that, of which obviously improving how farmers can be rewarded for capturing carbon in agroforestry is one.
That's brilliant, great. Just one very last quick question from Bill. Can the panel comment on the National Beef Association's campaign for the government to penalise farmers who rear livestock extensively on pasture-based systems, imposing a levy on cattle finishing no later than 27 months of age?
I actually spoke to the National Beef Association this morning on their proposals. They've pulled their document currently while they do a version 2. Yeah, it doesn't, for me, having livestock reared in a more natural way and natural feed systems doesn't really sit with trying to push them to produce earlier, even when you use better breeding techniques. So let's see when the new paperwork comes out in a week or two, and then we can see how we can engage. I think that's the way to put it.
That's brilliant, lovely, thank you. Let's just see, we've got a couple of other quick questions coming up on here. Where do I find the practical guide to achieve net zero? Well, we have one from Nature Friendly Farming Network. I'll pop the link up, I'll pop it up again for you in just a second so that you can have that on the chat. And do we need to go, from Andy, do we need to go beyond zero carbon given that agriculture and land use is one of the few areas that can sequester carbon? So I don't know who wants to answer that one.
We need to go, as an industry, we need sub-zero. Net zero for agriculture is not the point of stop. We've got to get below that to actually, many of the industries, many of government are talking about more trees, more this, more that. That's actually farmers' land, a lot of that's going to be on. How do we get revenue streams to deliver that and give solutions? Whether it's slowing the flow of water, carbon capture, nature recovery, actually UK is 70% farmland. How do we support farmers in delivering the outputs that society wants us to?
Okay, anything from anybody else? We're on to that one, lovely. So I will pop up the link again in a moment to the net zero one, but if you go onto the Nature Friendly Farming Network, which is nffn.org.uk, go under policy, you can see all our various policies on different things, including all the net zero work as well. We're nearly hitting the 3 o'clock deadline. What I'd like to say is an absolutely enormous thank you to everybody for joining us this afternoon. It's been great to have the speakers, and thank you very much for their time in doing that. And we've been really grateful for all the questions and everyone's participation within this session. We hope you found it useful from a net zero point of view as well, and come back with some practical ideas. If you don't know much about nature friendly farming, so please do go to the website, go to the exhibition sponsor room. There's lots more information in there, and it's free to join if you'd like to join us at any time. We'd love to have your participation. Thank you ever so much indeed to everyone, and also for the Northern Real Farming Conference for letting us host this session as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alison.
Okay, thank you.
We'll find you in the chat room or wherever it is on the other bit.
I think we could disappear to a chat room if we wish. Yes.
Great, thanks all.
That's really good. Right, I think that went well.
Thank you very much, one and all.
Okay, bye all.
Yep, thanks all. Well done, Alison.
I think we got through all questions.
That's good. Right, I'll go and see what it looks like on the website, on the function there.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Bye.